Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Telford Wrekin Council Planning Committee. This evening's meeting is held in public to ensure that all those involved or interested in the planning applications can see and hear how the decisions are made. It's important that the speakers are able to present their information without interruption, and that the council members of the committee are able to hear and consider the material presented. Only those people who have been notified are able to speak. I would ask everyone else to remain quiet, not to interrupt the meeting, and to allow the members to make their decisions. I remind everyone that council meetings can be photographed or recorded, and ask all participants to recognise the importance of the planning process. And will everybody please turn off silence or turn off their mobile phones. Welcome to the meeting. Before I start the meeting, can I announce that with the sad loss of Jackie Loveridge, the Cabinet Council consider the makeup of the committees and had some reshuffles, and they've appointed Gemma Offland as the Vice Chair of this committee. Okay. Thank you. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, I no received any apologies tonight for the meeting.
Right, thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Chair, I was on once and planned for. I've sat on the meetings very so I will leave the room and not take no part in the debate.
Okay, fine, thank you, Graham. Any other declarations? Right. Item 3, deferred withdrawn applications.
There are none, Chair.
No, none of those. Item 4, planned site visits.
There are none at the moment, Chair.
None at the moment. You drop one on us, will you, soon? Yeah. Item 5, plan application for determination. 5.1 is the land opposite Woodside Farm, Kinnersley, and we'll start with that, and then 5.2, land opposite Woodside Farm, Kinnersley again. Mark.
Do the minutes. The minutes.
Minutes.
Have we agreed the minutes? Is there minutes? No, there's no minutes.
Excuse
Chair, sorry.
Been reminded we haven't confirmed the minutes last meeting, but they're not here to confirm, so I can't do it. It's not on the agenda. They're not out yet, are they? Okay. We have 2 lots next meeting then. Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
That's okay. Item 5.1.
Thank you, Chair. There was a member's site visit in respect of this application this afternoon.
Quickly, you're just in time to we've started. Okay, Mark,
So there was
thank
a
you.
member's site visit which took place this afternoon, attended by a number of members of this committee. An additional statement has been submitted by Lilleshall Parish Council, which was received after the deadline for this to have been read to this committee.
The public had problems with the hearing.
Okay, sorry. So an additional statement was submitted by Lilleshall Parish Council, which was received after the deadline for this to have been read at the committee. Notwithstanding this, the statement is broadly consistent with comments as outlined within the committee report, namely making the following observations. Highways, noting conflict with policy TA1 of Lilleshall Neighbourhood Plan, involving a continuous and even track with limited passing places. Housing, noting this does not meet the criteria within policy DEV1 of the Neighbourhood Plan, as the site is located outside of the village of Lilleshall. Design, noting conflict with policy D1 of the Neighbourhood Plan, as its design is not sympathetic or in keeping with neighbouring properties. And finally, ecology and landscape, noting conflict with policy LE2 of the Neighbourhood Plan, as it is located within the Weald Moors strategic landscape area. So the site itself is located on Kinnersley Drive, which falls within the parish of Lilleshall, located outside of the village boundary, approximately 3 miles from the market town of Newport, and within the Weald Moors strategic landscape area. This application site is currently a field opposite Woodside Farm. The field has an existing access in the form of a field gate, and the site is predominantly enclosed by a hedgerow fronting the adopted highway. Furthermore, there is a public right-of-way which runs diagonally through the site. A residential property lies directly to the west of the site, Cumbran, and 3 further residential properties on the opposite the site, namely Woodside Farm, Witchwood Kennels and Cattery, and Hinkswood House. The property, Doongiel, I hope I pronounced that right, is located further along Kinnersley Drive in the next field to the application site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. I have 3 speakers on this one. Councillor Andrew Eade. Three minutes, Chairman. Members, one of my primary objections to this planning application is with regard to policy C3 of the local plan concerning access and egress to and from the proposed livery yard and the resulting impact on the very narrow lane used to service the site, something which will result in a significant impact on the road and all properties sited right the way along its length. The authority's highways assessment is all very well and good for 8 movements a day. However, having operated a livery yard myself, horse owners will, by and large, visit at least twice a day, particularly first thing in the morning and later on in the afternoon, then again often in the evenings. That figure is also greatly exceeded by horse owners over the weekend period. However, when visiting friends and family are taken into account, the amount of traffic movements will rise even further. When also adding fodder and feed deliveries, personal experience dictates that daily traffic movements will, on average, exceed 16 a day. Such usage undoubtedly represents a significant intensification of use and in itself casts into doubt the original highways assessment. The other problem with Kinnersley Drive is that it's very narrow, as mentioned earlier. It's also very straight and has essential drainage ditches on either side of the carriageway. As a result, meeting other vehicles will be problematic as passing places are all but non-existent. Trying to negotiate that lane with a horse box and large vehicles pulling trailers will on many occasions be very difficult. As it's also difficult to reverse such vehicles over long distance, the potential to completely block the road for existing businesses and residents is very real, and in my mind is an unacceptable intensification of use. I also have concerns, Chairman, when considering the new highway code recommendations, which now advise drivers to pass horses at no less than 2 metres distance. Such a manoeuvre is absolutely impossible on Kinnersley Drive due to its narrow width and ditches that I mentioned previously. As such, it presents a further danger to all road users and horse users alike. Although at 7.5 of the officer's report talks about placing a condition to restrict the use of the manage, no such condition is stipulated within the report. That proposed condition must be imposed and should be further extended to limit its use to horses on livery within the yard itself. That manage should not be available for public hire, otherwise it will exacerbate traffic movements even further to those that I've mentioned before and bring additional towing vehicles and horse boxes to and from that livery site. If members are minded to approve this application, and I sincerely hope they're not, I would strongly ask and urge that such a condition is imposed. Thank you, Chairman. Andrew. Katie Lutner, please.
Thank you, Chair. I object on the following planning application TWC 2020-0356. Silver Spur livery is positioned within the designated area outlined by Telford Wrekin's strategic landscape study. The location is identified as Weald Moors and as a distinctive landscape. The document states it is necessary to have a suitable landscape character assessment, and the applicant has not submitted this assessment, and therefore how can you determine an outcome today? The study states under 1.2 purpose that it provides principles regarding development and change to ensure the special qualities of each strategic landscape and that they are not to be compromised. The application in question will without doubt compromise and have a detrimental impact upon the Wealdmoors, visually and environmentally. The site stands isolated within the 10 acres, excuse me, sorry, and this deters from happening, and this will detract from the appearance of the land. Therefore, there is no footprint to replicate, as was in place at Wychwood Kennels, as the applicant likes to compare their proposed business to. I'd like to mention that Wychwood does not sit within the designated landscape, and therefore the continual linking is irrelevant and totally not comparable. The negative impact continues with our resident wildlife, notably badgers, which use and reside on the proposed developed area. Images were attached on my objection and another's of a badger's latrine, which indicates boundaries between the social groups, suggesting that badgers are present and they use this proposed site. I understand the applicant's ecology report suggests there's no wildlife here. Badgers are a protected species, and we should not allow any activity to be undertaken in their environment, and I believe a licence is required. The site proposal joins the boundary of Kinnersley Moor Woods, and this is a designated local wildlife site, making it less believable that no wildlife is found at the applicant's site. See page 20, figure 3 for the image of these natural designations. Our local wildlife should not be put at risk to accommodate the supposed need of non-local people who do not care for our area as we do as a community down Kinnersley Drive. The profile for the Wealdmoors states some of the key characteristics: that it should be a very quiet road network, compromising of narrow lanes, it should remain to be peaceful, and it has few distinctive landmarks within the area, and largely because of a flat topography. All of those characteristics will be challenged by this proposal. The site will change the flat topography due to the unnecessary buildings. It will detract from the tranquil location by the increased traffic to the site, and it will affect our narrow lanes. Outlined later in the strategic plan is a sensitivity appraisal, and it states that it is important that any development or change in management which occur within or around the strategic landscape is not detrimental to the special qualities of this landscape, and the proposal will negatively affect over half of the special qualities. 1. Flat and lie low in topography. The building will detract from this. 2. A strong sense of visual closure created by the pattern of woodland blocks. 3. A sense of peace and tranquility and a very little visible development. Distinct lack of peace and tranquility surely will follow with a higher volume of traffic that will vacate that site on a daily basis. 4. Strongly rural landscape with little settlement and relatively... Yes, thank you, Chair. A sense of history of the landscape and will alter the old age landscape of where the house and the livery and the mobile home suggest. I implore each of you today to make your decision and help me to protect and conserve the special area from an unnecessary development by objecting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Andrew Lane, please, the applicant's agent.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. Thank you. I'm here to represent the applicant as their agent to speak in support of the application. As you know, the application's recommended for approval. This is a small-scale livery for a maximum of 10 horses. The keeping and riding of horses within the rural area is perfectly acceptable. The site itself is accessed via its existing field gate. That field gate will be improved slightly to reflect the appearance of those down Kinnersley Lane, and also to provide the required visibility displays for highways requirements. Your highways team are perfectly acceptable of the proposal. They have no issues. All visibility displays can be met. Vehicle movements are minimal. The applicants have over 32 years of experience with horses, and they are estimating around 8 movements per day. Those 8 movements perhaps can be reduced as well if the mobile accommodation is approved on the second application. 8 movements per day could be a tractor in and out of that field gate very easily, or an uncontrolled number of movements in and out of that field gate by a farmer, hay bales, whatever else. The anticipated vehicle movements for the livery is probably far less than the kennels and catteries directly opposite. Your ecology department are perfectly acceptable of the proposal. A full ecology report has been done by a local, very experienced ecological company. A full drainage design has been done for the site as well. Your drainage department fully approves that drainage scheme. This, as I say, is a sensitive, very small scale livery which would sit nicely and sensitively within the rural area, and we welcome your approval in line with the planning officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Mark, it's back to you.
Thank you, Chair. So full planning permission is sought for the creation of a riding arena and erection of stables to run a livery yard with associated access, limited hard standing, gravel track and boundary enclosures within the existing field along Kinnersley Drive. Members will note an associated application in respect of the mobile home at the same site for a period of 3 years, which also forms part of this agenda. Additional information has been provided throughout the course of the application in respect of the operations of the proposed business and drainage matters in order to overcome comments raised by the technical consultee, for which reconsultation has taken place following these changes. The site is located within the rural area where the principle of running a livery yard and erecting a riding arena and stables is considered to be acceptable, as it would facilitate activities typically expected to take place within the rural area. The proposal would diversify the rural economy and result in investment in the rural area. The applicant has provided evidence to support their application in the form of a business case and financial statements to demonstrate how the business would operate and to demonstrate that it would be viable. The applicant has also provided a letter in support of the application detailing the operation of the site, confirming that there would be a maximum of 10 horses being cared for at any one time, and visitor hours for the site would be limited to 8 AM to 8 PM weekdays and 9 AM to 8 PM weekends. Accordingly, visitors to the site would be spread throughout the day, ensuring negligible impact upon the highway network. The applicant has confirmed the lighting strategy will be required, as the horses will require care later into the evening and during winter months. The local planning authority consider this to be acceptable in principle, as a degree of lighting would be reasonable to allow for the officers consider this to be acceptable in principle, as a degree of lighting would be reasonable to allow for the business to successfully operate. However, a condition is proposed requesting details of lighting to be submitted prior to development taking place in order to ensure no adverse impact would occur upon neighbouring residents or biodiversity. Notwithstanding reference within the business case to flood lighting, it is considered that this would not be appropriate form of lighting and would need to be avoided in favour of a more discreet system. With regard to visual amenity, the proposal would result in the development of a small section of existing field to form the new riding arena, stables and ancillary development, with the works undertaken being consistent with other farm buildings within the immediate vicinity and in line with those typically expected within the rural area. The materials for the stables have been amended throughout the course of the application, whereby the exterior is now proposed to be timber clad with a corrugated roof sheeting, with a small proportion of hard standing around the edge of the arena for practical access. It is acknowledged the site is part of the Wildmoor Strategic Landscape designation. It is considered that it is necessary for some development within the rural area and within the strategic landscape area to allow diversification of the rural economy, and the local and officers consider that the works proposed would not conflict with the aims of policy NE7 of the Lilleshall Neighbourhood Plan to protect strategic landscape areas. With regard to drainage, whilst the council's drainage officer previously objected to the scheme due to the lack of a drainage infrastructure within the vicinity of the site, the applicant has since put forward a detailed drainage strategy to justify how the site will be drained, and the drainage officer has now confirmed that they support the application subject to conditions. A series of comments were raised during the consultation by the parish council, councillor Andrew Reid and local residents, the primary concern being the impact upon the highway network. whereby the council's highway officer has raised no objection based upon the terms set out by the applicants in their business plan, as the site will result in a very limited number of additional movements which would have negligible impact upon the road network along Kinnersley Drive. Accordingly, the recommendation remains as outlined within the report to committee, namely to grant full planning permission subject to conditions, and as noted by Councillor Reid, happy to use a condition restricting the number of horses on the site to 10 at any one time, but not, but also to allow for horses which aren't the applicants to be present on the site as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. It's open to the committee. Councillor Scott, then Councillor Sahota.
It was interesting today to see that what Kinnersley Drive is like, and I appreciate it's tight in places. However, I did note on leaving the site visit how I was personally forced to reverse about a quarter of a mile by a man with an empty trailer who would not let me pass, no matter how I tried. And I noticed how the passing places were all blocked up suddenly with cars or bricks. That was interesting. So I think they were trying to make a point somehow, which didn't go down very well, I must say. But anyway, that was my experience. Couple of questions though, please. Would we expect to see horses on the road? In other words, will they be allowed out of this area onto the road for recreational purposes? And would you expect family and friends to be visiting such a thing as a menage?
So in terms of the horses on the road, it's a public adopted highway, Kinnersley Drive, right up to the site and beyond. There is nothing we could do to kind of stop horse riders using the road for that kind of purpose.
No, in general, but in terms of the 10 horses that would be on site, would it be expected to be a reasonable thing for those people to decide to use Kinnersley Drive on their horses?
In terms of the facilities that are provided within the site, so there's the arena and there's kind of the grassed area where you saw the horses on site grazing at the minute. So there would be sufficient space for them to kind of exercise and within the site without necessarily needing to leave, but there would still be the option if they wanted to access Kinnersley Drive itself. In terms of family and friends using the arena, again, there's nothing to kind of stop that. So in terms of anyone visiting the site to see their horses within the stable block, there's nothing necessarily stopping them from being able to kind of go into the arena themselves and use it.
Mark, who is expected to go to this area?
Principally, it's for horses to stay for a reasonable period of time. So it wouldn't necessarily be a case of visitors attending necessarily on a daily basis. There may be instances of that. Otherwise, it's kind of used as boarding for the horses. So the kind of applicants or the operators of the facility would principally kind of go and I suppose muck the horses out or do whatever works involved in kind of running the stables.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a number of points on clarification. There is a 106 agreement. Is that £250,000? Is it?
Not on this application.
Is it some? There is somewhere in the report. No, sorry, I must have read the wrong one there, Mark. I'm jumping on, jumping the gun there. The roads are quite in a poor conditions. What will happen to the roads, because it's clearly stated here that the roads are very, very. And then I'm not going to go into the horses because my colleague has already spoken. But how can the highway be so specific that there would there'll only be about cars visiting one day, not exceed 8? I mean, that's pretty specific. But how can it be so? And secondly, horses on site not exceed 10. Well, I'm not too sure, you know, you can say, you know, 5 or 6 or 10, but they're quite specific. So I think you addressed the horses there. But the next issue, can you just clarify the Lillishall neighbourhood plan? Does that sort of, it says in there that in the objections that it's contrary to the Lillishall neighbourhood plan and Telford Wrekin plan. And I think you talked about it, but can you clarify that for me, that it's not in it somewhere?
So in terms of to run through the series of points, the 8 movements is something that's kind of being calculated based upon the business plan and business case submitted by the applicants in terms of how the site would operate. So that kind of works on the basis that it wouldn't be each of the owners of the horses kind of coming on a daily basis. There may be instances where some owners have a series of horses that are stored within the stables as well, which in turn would reduce the vehicle movements. So it's based upon a lot of the information that's been presented to the council as part of the application. It's also worth noting that the application, or the business itself, is being relocated from an existing facility outside of the borough. So in terms of how that site has operated in the past, then we kind of have the benefit of how that's operated a little bit when bringing it to this site. In terms of the 10 stables or the 10 horses itself being capped, that's really, there's 10 stables, 10 horses.
Is it, so 10 stables, 10 horses, is that what you're saying more or less?
Yeah, absolutely. But we're able to cap that because in terms of any enforcement, if it was considered to be in excess of that figure, it would be reasonable for us to be able to go out and see for ourselves the number of horses that are being stored within those stables, and such that it would be reasonable to take enforcement action. In respect of the neighbourhood local plan, clearly development outside of kind of the boundary, I suppose, of Lillishall is to be quite tightly constrained in terms of where kind of appropriate development goes. But it's, again, it doesn't necessarily prohibit certain forms of development within those areas.
But there exists one, does it?
Well,
a neighbourhood plan.
In terms of the neighbourhood plan, it can't necessarily immediately say an absolute no to kind of all those uses. There's that kind of flexibility over certain uses where they are considered appropriate within that kind of context. Here we've got the rural location, and we would kind of typically apply that equestrian or agricultural uses are kind of appropriate within that rural setting.
Yeah, what I was concerned about, you know, there seems to be pretty high feelings out there, especially about, you know, the increase in traffic and increase in comings and goings and so on. And the highway seems to be saying, yeah, that's fine with us. And you sort of okayed it, but that's fine. I think you answered all my questions, Mark. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? Councillor Dugmore?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, you know, it was good to go on the site visit, because when I first saw this report, I thought, well, you know, keeping horses in a field in a rural area, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. And then started reading through the report and going on the site visit, and you know, sort of yeah, I do have lots of concerns with it. The more I look at it, I mean, there's no point in having a neighbourhood plan, and it's quite an arduous process getting these in place, because my parish council is still going through it, and it's taken 2 to 3 years. It is a material consideration, and as this is not a large development and a massive strategic development, well then there's more weight should be given to the neighbourhood plan, because it's based upon what the local people think in their particular area, and they've had input into that, and I think that we ignore that at our peril, particularly on a situation like this. I mean, really, as far as the situation goes, as to access goes, I mean, that really was an eye opener. I mean, I have been down there on numerous occasions, and I've even used well, I've been and had a look around the cattery as well. So I do know the area, and certainly the road has deteriorated since I was last down there. I think Councillor Scott, sort of appreciate it was a bit irritating for you to be forced to back up, but I think that was quite a useful lesson, indicating you found it difficult enough in your car. How the hell you'd do it towing if you had a horse box on the back? It'd be very, very difficult, very, very difficult. And so I think that was quite useful. I mean, there wasn't any necessary. It really wasn't necessary for residents to block their drives, so there weren't any passing places, because there are very few passing places as it is. And for an adopted highway, I think Kinnersley Drive is in an appalling condition, really, and certainly, it had the appearance of being unadopted. It is difficult. It will be difficult anyway, whatever traffic goes down there. It's always going to have difficulty, and I think that if the application had got some passing places to go in, well, that would help to mitigate some of the problems getting in and out. I mean, with regards to horses on the road, well, I live near Telford Equestrian Centre, and we have horses passing my house at least twice a day. And I think, and my biggest surprise on the report is at 3.5, where no deliveries to the site is anticipated. Well, that's patently ridiculous. It's a ridiculous statement. A business that doesn't have any deliveries, particularly with livestock, because there's always going to be deliveries. There's feed, bedding, there's manure. If one of the horses is ill and has to be taken away, of course of course there's going to be deliveries. You've got to get the horses there in the first place. So, and I know quite a few people who do own horses, and it's an expensive business, and if they can't keep them near to where they live, well then they keep them in places like in livery yards, and they go and see them at least twice a day because they want to care for them, and therefore to say that there's only going to be 8 vehicle movements is quite frankly ridiculous, and I don't believe that one iota at all. As far as the as I say, I mean, I think you could have mitigated some of the problems by having passing places in there, and I do notice that sort of the badgers were mentioned. I can't see anywhere. I mean, perhaps I've missed it, but perhaps the officer could tell me where in the report it goes on about the effects upon badgers, because with them being a protected species, they're usually in there somewhere, but I couldn't see badgers in there. So there are lots of problems with this application, and at the moment I don't think they've been mitigated, even though at first sight it may seem like it's, as I said before, it's a bit of a no-brainer, but actually when you get into the detail of it, this is probably not the right type of application to be approved.
I've got that activated. Apologise for that. My son. I did switch it off. Sorry about that, Nigel. But carry on.
Peter.
Peter?
I just come in to say, because as Councillor Dugmore brought it up, the reason I had to reverse back a long way was because on 3 occasions I indicated to the person forcing me backwards that I could easily get across so he could pass, but he refused to let me do it. So it wasn't a question of being nowhere to pass. I could have done it, but a point was being made, I believe.
Hmm.
Can I respond to that?
No.
Chair, can I respond to that, please?
Yes, Chairman.
Sorry, could I just respond to that point? Is it okay? No?
Members of the public are unfortunately allowed to
The chairman did say that was okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's sad, but that's why we give people the right to speak at the start and put their case forward.
Okay.
And that's what has been done admirably. And the councils are now discussing the report and what the public have said. Ian?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was a very interesting site visit. It's quite clear that the road access Kinnersley Lane is quite difficult, being as it's a very narrow road with very nice deep ditches either side. The funny thing, it says that the sign at the entrance to the road says a single track with passing places. I couldn't actually see any designated passing places on that road. There was a few entrance to gates. There's a few entrance to where the other buildings on at access to the road, but no specifically designated passing places at all. So so there is a great opportunity, I see, to having traffic problems on that road, which I feel that need to have some mitigation. I note that the applicant has stated in its case that there only can be a maximum of 8 cars visiting the site. Now, we've heard from Councillor Eade, who used to run one of these types of businesses, actually of a similar size, because I remember us granting permission for it some years ago, and his experience shows that you will get owners coming to look and feed and clean and deal with their horses twice a day, regularly. Not all of them, I agree, but even if only half of them, that's 5, twice a day, that's 20 journeys at least. And we're talking about journeys going to and from down a narrow lane. And I think it could be a lot more. And then the other bit, as it says in paragraph 7.4, the applicant has advised there's going to be no deliveries to the site. Does that mean that they're not going to allow the feeding of the animals, the cleaning of the stables, etc.? If that's the case, I think we shouldn't allow them to have any business at all. And finally, we've got this is a strategic landscape that is recognised as a strategic landscape, the Weald Moors, which is a low-level flat ground, wide open spaces, with a few trees, and nothing impairing the view. And we're proposing to stick in 10 wooden stables and a menage or menage, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, which actually is completely against the Lilleshall local plan, which has been gone through the process and is formally approved as a material consideration, and it's going against that. The report says it's only going to be a small interference in that, but I reserve the right to actually disagree with that, having seen many these types of places in use. I remember having to take my daughter to one where she used to go and help muck out the stables and feed and clean the horses every day. So I think that the officer's assessment of the impact is incorrect. And I really cannot support this application, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ian. Gemma?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it probably needs to be brought into perspective that the fact that there is already currently horses on there, so there's probably food being dropped off, etc. So is that actually having an impact? So would having this have any more impact than what it already is? Right, so but there is at the moment, so they must be having deliveries currently.
It says in the report that there's no delivery.
Councillor Dugmore, will you
So
Clarification,
yeah, thanks, Councillor Dugmore. I didn't interrupt you when you were speaking. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor.
Yeah. So yeah, so put it into perspective. There is probably already deliveries. So what impacts that actually having? To me, going down the drive today, you know, there is points where you can pull in and pull out sufficiently. Now, again, is that down to people's driving, reversing, etc.? And ultimately, you would expect that someone with a trailer would have the ability to manoeuvre that vehicle to be able to, you know, you wouldn't send out a HGV driver without having the experience of being able to move in that vehicle in the first place.
Thank you, Councillor Offland. Anybody else? No?
Chair? Yeah, I mean, I hear the extent of the feelings, but unfortunately, if we can't have a livery in a place, you know, rural area, then I'm not too sure where we can. Therefore, I remove the recommendations, Chair.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded. Recommendation before you, and that's at paragraph 9.1. All those in favour, please show. Against? 2 against. Okay. We now come to agenda item 5B. This is the other part of the same application. It's the 3-year siting of a mobile home modification to existing access to support the livery. Mark?
Thanks, Chair. So again, there's a member site visit this afternoon attended by the members of the committee to run through the additional statement that was provided by Lilleshall Parish Council. This was again received after the deadline for it to be read out today. Notwithstanding this, the statement is broadly consistent again with the comments within the committee report, namely in respect of highways and the conflict with policy TA1 of the Lilleshall neighbourhood plan, housing and not meeting the criteria within policy DV1, design noting conflict with policy D1 of the neighbourhood plan, ecology and landscape noting policy with conflict LE2. In respect to the setting of the site, again, this is the same site as that which was discussed. so located on Kinnersley Drive within the parish of Lilleshall, outside of the village boundary, approximately 3 miles from the market town of Newport, and within the Wildmoor strategic landscape. The site is currently a field opposite Woodside Farm. It has an existing access in the form of the existing field gate, and is predominantly fronted the highway by an existing hedgerow. There is a public rights of way which crosses diagonally through the site, and there are a series of residential properties within the vicinity, Cumbrian, and 3 further properties, Woodside Farm, Witchwood Kennels and Cattery, and Hinkswood House, with property Doon Gyle further along Kinnersley Drive itself. Thank you.
Mark. Again, we have speakers. Councillor Andrew Reid.
Right, thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief on this part of the application. The caravan is within, or proposed caravan is within the strategic landscape area, and that should be respected, as should the Lilleshall neighbourhood plan. Great care was taken over that to try and control appropriate development. Now, I'm not sure that a mobile home stuck in the middle or the edge, periphery of a strategic landscape area like that is acceptable, to be quite honest. I don't think it pays due regard to what that area is and what it stands for and how it's been managed so far. Now, adding to that, I'll be quite candid with you that trying to run 8 horses as a business on 8.5 acres of land is not going to be possible. It's not viable. I wish I could have seen the business case for it. If I could probably make a fortune out of it, to be quite honest. So putting a mobile home on there, the drainage, which will drain into the middle of a field, which is on the Weald Moors. Now, you can see why this was first registered in 2020, and it's taken until now to try and get it to planning committee, to bring it to some sort of resolution. The original objections to this came from, amongst others, from our own drainage officers. I don't believe that site can be drained. That field is wet and boggy in the winter time. You put horses on it. Now, horses damage fields. They uproot grass. They don't nibble it like sheep or cut it. They uproot it. And what you end up is with a mess. Now, to put 8 horses on what effectively is 8.5, maybe 8 acres of land, that is not going to drain. It's going to be nothing less than a quagmire, to be quite honest. I don't think this warrants people on site, not for that number of horses. I don't think it's the right thing to put in a strategic landscape area, and I would ask members to actually consider declining this part of the application. It simply is not needed, it is not necessary, and it is the wrong thing in the wrong place. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. Katie Lutner.
Thank you, Chair. The proposed siting of the mobile home within the 10-acre field as far away as physically possible from the livery buildings. From my experience, should an animal become distressed, or you should always be alerted firstly by the noise they make. All farmyards have the house at the centre of the buildings for this reason. The proposal has 3 houses closer to the livery buildings than that of the proposed mobile home, which is meant to be there to monitor. So surely the use of security cameras would have to be used to monitor sound. The application is supported by statements from a vet and a consultant stating that accommodation is required on site, but based on the assumption to be adjacent to the buildings in question. The proposed site is not within the curtilage of the livery development. It is 10 acres away. The welfare regulations, which cover horses, cattle and all animals, that require somebody to be within a 30-minute travelling distance. Horses are currently on site and have been there for the last 2 years, with the applicants travelling a far greater distance than that and merely tending to the horses for 5 minutes a day. Given the reliance on cameras, there is always affordable housing which is near, which is for sale and rent at the Humbers, which is only a mile away and would definitely meet the within 30-minute travelling distance of regulations. I've talked about the impact about the livery development on the Weald Moor strategic landscape. So if a residence is to be approved, then I do not understand why we cannot contain the damage to one area rather than destroying the majority of the field by creating further access. There would be no need to have a separate road to the mobile home and associated parking. Surface and foul water drainage could also be contained to one area rather than destroying more of the habitat of the wildlife present there. And at the proposed siting, it is detrimental to both the animal welfare and the landscape, and I can see no reason for it being proposed other than to create two development sites, which I can only assume will be sold separately at a later date. In addition to the site, it is wholly contained within a designated nitrate vulnerable zone, which limits the amount of nitrogen which can be applied to the land. The applicant provides no information of how this government legislation will be covered to deal with the storage and spreading of manure, which will be estimated about 90 tonnes of manure per year. In terms of animal husbandry, the same welfare standards apply to both horses and cattle. So are we now saying as livestock keepers with 10 animals, you will get permission for a property to adequately care for the animals, as a vet consultant would certainly provide the same evidence in those circumstances? Is this the precedent you wish to set as Telford Wrekin's interpretation on the MPPF? In other parts of the county regarding essential need, it is totally different. The residents of Lilleshall, regardless of our political party, overwhelmingly support the local plan to protect our strategic landscape. The parish council and every resident along Kinnersley Drive have objected. The proposal damages our precious landscape, and I ask you to support the views of the communities you represent, and please refuse this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. Andrew Lane.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members again. Thank you for the decision on the previous application, which obviously establishes the livery. This separate application is for the accommodation for the livery owners to provide care to the horses within the livery. You may recall very recently that you have approved a rural workers' dwelling for the cattery and the kennels right opposite our site. That rural workers' dwelling is a dormer bungalow, and it has recently been completed. You probably saw that on your site visit today. The buildings around the site frontage of this particular site are houses, clad rural barns, storage buildings, and the new rural workers' dwelling. This is a rural workers' dwelling that we are applying for to support the business of the livery, which you've just approved. That the accommodation is a small-scale mobile home, which is going to be limited for a period of 3 years, to help the council understand the business viability of the livery. That 3-year limit is acceptable to the applicants, and that will be reviewed prior to the expiry of 3 years should the accommodation be approved. We don't see the mobile home as being any different to a new dormer bungalow. In fact, the mobile home is a lot lower in its height and a lot less of an impact on the rural area. The livery owners have had an independent report prepared by a specialist rural consultant and land management consultant, well respected within his field. He agrees that accommodation is required on site to provide the highest level of care for the horses. Once again, this application is recommended for approval. Highways have no issues, ecology have no issues, landscape have no issues, and we welcome the committee's support to approve this to accompany the approval granted earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. So permission is sought for the temporary siting of the mobile home for a temporary 3-year period to support the livery business alongside the associated access gravel track and enclosures of the site. Members will have already noted the permission being granted for the livery use previously. Additional information has been sought through the application process relating to the design of the scheme and drainage to address previous comments and objection from technical consultancies for which a reconsultation has taken place. The site is located within the rural area where new development is controlled. One of the exception criteria listed within policy HO10 of the local plan is meeting the essential need for a rural worker, which is the criteria the applicant is looking to meet through this proposal. As part of their evidence base, the applicant has submitted a report by an agricultural specialist which confirms there is a requirement for the applicants to live on site in order to operate the business as proposed. Therefore, it's considered that the criteria for satisfying policy HO10 has been met for the mobile home on a temporary basis. It should be noted that if the business has been operated successfully over the 3-year period and is demonstrated to be viable, the officers would expect the applicants to put forward a more permanent solution as the mobile home would not be supported on a long-term basis. It's acknowledged that the site is part of the Wilmore Strategic Landscape designation, and it's considered that it is necessary for some development within the rural area and within the strategic landscape area to again allow diversification of the rural economy. And officers consider that the works proposed would not conflict with the aims of policy NE7 and the Lilleshall Neighbourhood Plan to protect strategic landscape areas. In respect to neighbouring amenity, it's considered the proposal would not result in any significant detrimental impact upon neighbouring properties to the site. Regarding drainage, as per the previous application, the council's drainage officer had previously objected to the scheme. However, the applicant again has put forward a detailed drainage strategy to demonstrate how that would be drained, subject to conditions to satisfy that. A number of comments were again raised during the consultation period by the parish council, councillor Eade and local residents. These were predominantly related with the livery business rather than the mobile home directly and have been addressed within the committee report itself. Accordingly, the recommendation remains as outlined within the report to committee, namely to grant full planning permission subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Scott.
I understand the need to have a worker on site. I mean, it's fairly obvious. And I also understand why it's being cited where it is, because it's more discreet. But, as one of the speakers said earlier, is it not better to consider having this closer to the menage, because the animals may need emergency treatment and there'd be, you'd be able to hear them if that's the case, if you were closer. So has that been discussed or considered?
In terms of the application that's been put forward to us, we're making a recommendation based on the application submitted. I understand kind of the concerns or kind of what you've kind of said there. It's kind of striking that balance. We're accepting the site within the strategic landscape area, and in terms of the position of that mobile home, it would be screened from kind of the track by the, well, to a degree, by the existing hedgerow fronting Kinnersley Drive, whereas if it was set further into the site, it may kind of have more of a visual impact. In terms of the application put forward as well, it is just for a temporary period, so the 3 years. So it's not, we're not approving a kind of permanent feature in that location. It's to kind of assess whether the business is kind of viable. If we were to receive a more kind of permanent application, we would assess that on its merits at that time, and that could result in a different position to within the site, but that's not what we've got in front of us now to consider. In terms of the monitoring maybe of the horses, I don't necessarily think it has to be from the applicants being able to hear the horses directly. I think it was noted that the whoever's kind of looking after the stables must be within a certain kind of distance of that. That's because there's other kind of mechanisms whereby the applicants could kind of be alerted if there was a horse in distress. I think there's kind of camera systems and alarms that can kind of be installed to alert I suppose the carers.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dugmore?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously disappointed that the previous application was passed. I mean,
Can you speak up just a little bit, please? I'm having difficulty hearing you.
Ah, how sweet. Yeah, Chair. Sorry, I was disappointed that the previous application was passed, but that's their problem, not mine. I mean, the thing is that my main concern with this mobile home is the sewerage, because 3 years is a hell of a long time, and I'm assuming, although I don't know, that there's probably not main sewerage down there. Didn't think so. Therefore, it's going to be. I might watch the septic tank being transported to the site down Kinnersley Lane, because that actually might be quite interesting. That. And so the sewerage is going to be a problem, because we're not talking like sort of a few months here. My other concern is that in 3 years' time, the next thing is we'll be asked to propose a permanent dwelling on that site, and now then the applicant's agent makes the point about the bungalow, but wasn't that on the opposite side of the road, and it's not in the Wealdmore strategic landscape, although the Wealdmore strategic landscape seems to be just a title apportioned to a piece of land. It doesn't seem to protect it from anything, because we're just ignoring any of these local plans that we put in place when it suits. So those are my two main concerns, and as we've heard, and sort of, it's not necessary for anybody to be on site, and provided they're within the so many miles, can't remember how many it is now. Well then there's adequate protection to the horses.
Do you want to come back, Mark?
Yes, thank you, Chair. To kind of pick up on the main kind of issue around drainage of the site, both in terms of surface water and foul. So the mobile home section of the site has its own kind of strategy, as did the arena and stable section of the site. So we've kind of just run through this strategy for this kind of area. So in terms of the surface water, there's proposed to be kind of a sand head wall, which is essentially where the surface water would kind of drain and funnel into a infiltration basin, so a swale essentially, which in terms of the mobile home unit is proposed to be a short swale of 8.5 metres in length and 2 metres in width, which is 0.8 metres deep. And that's considered to be an appropriate strategy by the council's technical drainage officer. In terms of the foul sewerage, the plans again, which have received, which are considered acceptable by the council's drainage officer, is kind of a pure treatment plant with a pump outlet, which goes into a drainage mound. And the drainage mound itself is identified as kind of being a structure about 0.7 metres in height, which is a topsoiled grass bank with a geotextile protection layer with filtration sand and washed gravel. So that's considered an appropriate strategy by the technical drainage officer. So there is a strategy for both elements of the site to address both foul and surface water drainage.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else? No? Somebody move the recommendation then? Moved by Gemma, seconded by Coolib. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Against? 2 against. Okay. That's allowed. We now move on to the third item on the agenda tonight. Find myself. That's TWC 2021 0930, site of the former Wrekin Endeavour Centre, North Road. Andrew, we'll give them time to go. All right.
Just to confirm, Councillor Cox.
Was left as he declared an interest in this item. Okay. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a full application for the development of the former Wrekin Endeavour unit on North Road in Wellington. The application is for a 2- and 3-storey dementia care unit comprising 56 one-bed units for affordable rent. The applicants have offered nomination rights to the council, which will be secured by a legal agreement. Members will note a written update has been circulated outlining that officers have secured an off-grid bus shelter to replace the old shelter located on the site frontage. A bus shelter regeneration programme is being rolled out across the borough, as members will be aware. However, as this location was not highlighted in the 2022 programme, the landowners have agreed to facilitate the upgrade now, as the bus shelter would need to be relocated further south in any event to facilitate the access improvements. Officer recommendation is for approval subject to conditions and a legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor John Thompson, please. You've got 3 minutes, John.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair, councillors. The Old Park School and Junior School, the Endeavour Centre, has been empty for many years. We have, as councillors and the Telford Wrekin, have had many concerns about the site. Farcroft, next door, has been an excellent care home for many years, providing good caring service for residents. Dementia is a very alarming illness, part of Alzheimer, being part of a dementia supporting for residents who require full-time help and care. The development will provide new opportunities for employment for many staff. I'm in favour of this development, but I have a few concerns. The main concern is the safety of the children from the local schools, Wrekin View and St Patrick's. During the demolition and the building of the new care home, the thought and care must be given to the local schools and the safety of those pupils. During the development of these sites. Also, if possible, any new developments, can the council and the developers help towards any improvement to the school, the railings, the signs and the parking, which is desperately needed in that area. I'm very pleased that the bus stop is going to be retained. I'm not quite sure when they say the south where it's going to be. I hope it doesn't involve anywhere near the school sites. Also, the bus shelter for North Road, if any spare money for the 106 money could go to the school safety, that would be appreciated. During the development, the bus service must be maintained. Can I also thank you for supporting this development. Residents who can't shout for themselves. That's the young at school for education and their safety, and also the elderly and the residents with dementia who require our support and help. Thank you for supporting this development.
Thank you, John. Andrew?
Yeah, just a couple of things following Councillor Thompson's address. The safety of the school children will hopefully be secured by the site environmental management plan, which we secure as a condition on most major developments. That includes details of where the vehicles will park on site. They'll probably have a banksman on site during construction period for deliveries, and we can also look into controlling the hours of when the deliveries take place, because not to contradict with the school day. The improvements to the school, the development doesn't secure any money towards the school because of the intended use. If this was a housing application, we would, of course, they would generate demand for school places. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to secure any money towards the railings that John mentioned. But what we have got is the bringing the bus shelter forward, which I appreciate is a different piece of infrastructure. We don't quite know the exact location of the bus shelter yet. The reason for that is that during the technical approval of the access point, that'll be the time when it's worked out exactly where the bus shelter will go, but we know it will go slightly to the south of its existing position, but the highways officers will take into account the position of the school so it doesn't conflict. And then equally with the bus service, there'll be a requirement, even if it's a temporary sign for the bus stop, that there will be a continuation. There will never be that the bus service has to stop in that location. I think that was probably it, Chair. I'm just happy to answer any members' questions if they have any.
Councillor Sauter and then Janice Jones.
Couple of things. Councillor Thompson raised the issue of during the development, the school safety, the railings. Is this something that we can put into the conditions to make sure when a development is taking place that all those the concerns that the councillor raised that will be taken into account? And secondly, yes, I hear the bus shelter. You're not quite sure where we're going to put it, but perhaps when it is near the time, you can consult Councillor Thompson to where it should be the best place, or perhaps he can talk to his residents and constituents to say, where do they want their the bus shelter when it is put up there, just as something. I know he's pretty well in with the local constituents and the local residents, so I'm sure the residents and councillor will let you know where it is. So something during the development conditions and so on, so make sure there's a school safety, railings, etc. he raised.
Yeah, I think there were two slightly separate issues. One was the safety of the school children because of construction traffic coming and going, and that can be secured by a condition. And as we say, there'll be a banksman on the gates to ensure that the lorries aren't reversing out onto the highway, which is standard practice. I think the existing railings, and Chair might allow Councillor Thompson to correct me if I'm wrong, and my colleagues in highways won't thank me for this, but because the railings form part of the existing adopted highway, they would, if necessarily, be replaced at some point anyway. So, for example, if the railings had been hit by a car and they were bent, or they weren't sufficient, our highways team within the council would look to replace those. Unfortunately, asking the developer of this care home to contribute to the replacement of those railings, which ultimately is a council responsibility, wouldn't meet the legal tests. So it's a negative answer in terms of we can't get the developer to replace the railings, but if there was a requirement to beef them up or to replace them, the council should be doing that anyway. So it's not a double negative, if that makes sense.
Councillor Jones, then Councillor Dugmore. Councillor Jones first.
Can we ensure that we do put in the school hours? That is definitely built into that. I mean, between 8 and 9, for instance, and whatever time the school closes, just a bit before that and after, obviously, that the site traffic is not in the area or not accessible in the area at those times. The other thing, the walkways, I know it's on here where the school is and everything and these railings that you're talking about, But I would have thought it's just as important for the safety of the residents, the walkways and the railings being in place, especially as we're saying that these residents can be vulnerable in some ways. We don't want to stop them going out, we want them to go out and exercise, but also we want them to be safe. So I think whatever these railings are that are in place for safety reasons should be kept in place and kept intact.
Yeah, so the railings that are adjacent to the footpath by the school are being retained, they're not being removed. I think Councillor Thompson's suggestion was about improving these possibly. Yeah. So they will be retained.
If there's any safety issues, will be dealt with anyway, basically is what I'm saying.
Yeah, the neighbourhood services team regularly walk the streets, as you probably know, during school time to prevent illegal parking and also to ensure the safety of the users of the school. So if any issues are identified, that would then feed back to our highways network team, and they could design solutions within reason to make them safer, make the areas safer.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, Chair, the railings are to improve the safety, and the police have given recommendations as well. So I have fed that back, and it is being looked into at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thompson. We don't normally allow the public to have two bites of the cherry. Councillor Dugmore?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I'm quite, you know, sort of, these units are desperately needed, and you know, sort of, it's a good site to develop. Although I think it is going to create some parking issues at school drop-off and pick-up times, but that's something that'll have to be dealt with by others. My main concern, really, or the only concern I've got actually, is on 8.3.3, where we're told that the apartments are below national design space standards, and I would like to know by how much, because I think it looks a very, very nice development, but we can't be putting residents into substandard accommodation, and certainly not new build substandard accommodation. So that's the only thing that really concerns me.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Dugwell. Each apartment is 33 to 34 square metres. The nationally described space standard for a one-bed unit is 37 square metres if it's got a shower room, which all of these units have, and that's in a as opposed to a bathroom. If they have a bathroom, they need to be 39. So they are between 3 and 4 square metres short. The reason for that, and if Martha can just skip to the slide showing the clusters, it's like a 3D drawing internally. That's the one. So and I appreciate you can't see it very well, but the unit is made up of 10 or 12 apartments around a large central area which has a kitchen and a living facility. These range in size from 68 to 146 square metres, and the way the operation works is that these cluster areas or communal areas are used to encourage both independent living. Still, the occupants can continue to use the kitchens and the living space within it, so that they build a relationship with their fellow residents, and that's why they own units are slightly smaller, because they have the benefit of these communal areas.
Councillor Scott?
Yeah, very brief really. It's good to see the Parish Council and the Ward Member are supporting this. It's something that the borough needs, very much so. So simply put, I would support it and I would move it.
Seconded by Councillor Raj Mehta. All those in favour, please show. Any against? Ian, was that against, or?
No, it was.
You were a bit late getting your... Right. Okay. So that's approved then. And that brings us to the end of the meeting.